Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin in the Northwest Territories, where a wildfire evacuation notice for Fort Liard has been lifted. In a notice today, the hamlet says the wildfire burning to the southwest is no longer an immediate threat. NWT Fire says that wildfire got 15 millimeters of rain in the past day. They've cleared a black line around part of the fire where all the fuel has been extinguished. But the fire is still active and they've got more work to do on the west side. There's also good news from Wood Buffalo National Park. 10 fires have been burning there, and today officials announced that 8 of those fires are now classified as under control. 1 is extinguished. The additional fire crews and Parks Canada incident management team that were on the scene have returned home, though there are still crews in the park responding to fires and keeping an eye on things. Wood Buffalo is currently under extreme drought and there is no precipitation in the forecast right now, so a recreational fire ban is still in place for the entire park. While this is all good news, NWT fire officials are still asking people to be careful during the next few days. They say the forecast is calling for extremely dry weather. The fire danger in the North Slave, South Slave, and Detchell will range from high to extreme. And officials say conditions are right for fires to start easily, spread quickly, and become extremely difficult to control. Meanwhile, in the Yukon, a new pilot project hopes to reduce the risk of urban wildfires by making sure backyards and homes are safe with a free 1-hour assessment for residents. Virginie Ann has the details.
Fire needs ignition and it climbs a ladder.
Elise Malton says the new Fire Smart program is exactly the push she needed to fireproof her home.
I want to be able to rest easy and know that I've done what I can do to prevent a catastrophe.
Malton lives in a suburban neighborhood in Whitehorse. She might not live deep in the bush, but Malton says that doesn't mean her home is safe from fire.
All you have to do is look around and see that I'm close to a green belt. I mean, I just sort of feel like there's lots of issues that I'm very aware of that I need to somehow figure out how to deal with.
The Fire Smart coordinator says homes are not only at risk, they could end up as fuel for a major urban fire. Steve Reed says this is why the assessments are so important. His team, along with property owners, look at rooftops and windows, as well as surrounding trees and backyard plants. He says improving safety doesn't have to be complicated.
I think there's definitely some myth busting to do out there. You know, people, they might not want to do a property assessment because they're like, oh, I don't have the time, I don't have the money. They're going to tell me I need a new roof and new siding, and that's not always the case. You know, a lot of times, many of the things we're suggesting, they're inexpensive and they're relatively sort of quick fixes. What we're really looking to do is sort of armor homeowners with the simple things they can do to address this problem.
Mia Lee is part of the Fire Smart team. She says with the latest rain and snow melt, the Yukon is in a good position right now to prepare for the fire season.
We need to be on alert. We need to be prepared. So rather than being reactive, let's be proactive. We have time right now. So this is not the time to sit back and go, it's okay, you know, the conditions are pretty good. This is the time to fire smart your property.
Assessments can be booked through the city's website. The Fire Smart team will also do other outreach work throughout the summer, including pop-up tents in parks and markets. Virginie Ann, CBC News, Whitehorse.
With the first official weekend of summer behind us, many people are thinking of vacations, camping, and going out on the land and water. But in the Northwest Territories, there are concerns that historically low water levels could pose all kinds of problems. Robert Holden visited Fort Providence and Fort Simpson last week to see for himself what the Mackenzie and Liard rivers look like right now.
As you approach the Decho Bridge, which connects Fort Providence with the NWT highway system, you can see rocks and patches of sand sticking up out of the mighty Mackenzie River. That's the Merv Hardy Ferry back there. It was replaced by the Decho Bridge in 2012. Residents here in Fort Providence question whether that ferry would even be able to cross the Mackenzie River nowadays with water levels this low. The territorial government has noticed it too. They say flow rates on lakes and rivers across most of the NWT remain very low, and in some cases are the lowest ever recorded for this time of year. This hydrologist says a lack of precipitation is to blame.
Extreme low water levels are the result of extreme drought over the last 2.5 years, since about the summer of 2022. So there hasn't been very much water flowing into Great Slave Lake. The Mackenzie River drains Great Slave Lake. It moves water from Great Slave Lake through the Northwest Territories to the Arctic Ocean, and there's been more water coming out of Great Slave Lake than has been going in.
In Fort Simpson, it's the same story. Bob Norwegian is a community elder. He says he's shocked by what he sees on the river.
The water used to be about like 10 feet higher than normal. That's what we call low level. Right now, it seems like it's almost 8 feet normal below our normal anyway. And there's boulders all over the place that most people are really concerned about traveling the water.
Fort Simpson is accessed by the Liard Ferry in summer months. Norwegian says he's hopeful the territory will consider building a bridge into the community to avoid any problems. The territorial government did a preliminary study of the potential for a bridge in 2021, but there's still nothing in the works.
Everyone's worried.
The manager of lands and resources for the Liddiquay First Nation says there's problems other than transport associated with low water levels. As water levels go down, the concentration of dissolved solids goes up. He says this is particularly concerning if those solids happen to be pollutants. The First Nation is preparing a study to deal with that problem.
We're working with fish biologists and other groups to gather that information to see what the health of the animals are and see what's kind of coming out from that kind of information too.
With anxiety steadily rising across the territory, the question remains, will levels ever return to normal? Ryan Connon says it won't be a permanent change.
We will get more precipitation eventually. We will get wet periods. We will see the atmospheric and climate conditions that are conducive to bringing water back to the lake. But unfortunately, I can't tell you if that's going to be this summer or next summer or 5 summers from now.
A long time for elders and residents who continue to watch the water vanish from the shores. Robert Holden, CBC News, Fort Providence.
On the Hay River in the NWT, dredging work should start up again in early June. That's about a month earlier than was originally planned. The work is meant to clear out the east channel of the Hay River and the marine navigation channel between the river and Great Slave Lake. The Department of Infrastructure says the sediment they're dredging up is useful material like soil, but nobody wanted it, so they're going to drop it off at the Hay River landfill instead. In the Yukon, the territory's Environmental Assessment Board says a proposed placer mine on a creek near Whitehorse should not go ahead. An Alberta-based miner wants to build a Class 4 placer mine over 11 claims. Each claim spans the creek, which is a tributary of the Takini River. Julian Gignac reports.
The report from the board says as the project stands, the impacts to the land, water, culture, and fish are too great. So great, they can't be mitigated. Residents in this area, they use this creek behind me for their drinking water, and First Nations, they always have. For their drinking water, yes, but also tea ceremonies and fishing.
Any clean water, either creek or spring, in my eyes, should be protected, to their utmost degree. The value of water and clean water that you can pretty much drink right out of the running creek, that's an amazing spot.
The report says impacts to this very creek are likely to continue for as long as there's mining in the area. Even longer, potentially affecting multiple generations of residents and citizens. The report also says that the number of people who use this creek for their drinking water is in the hundreds. The report also focuses a lot on salmon. It says that the project as proposed will destroy habitat used by juvenile Chinook salmon. And this matters because Chinook salmon entering the Yukon River for the last several years have been coming in at a fraction of what they have in years prior.
This project on this scale, it involved a permanent creek diversion and 6 ford crossings, and it's a very large placer operation that's proposed in this area. And there's salmon fry here. Our salmon are very challenged right now, and we need to give them the best chance possible for any hope of return, for any hope of my grandkids seeing salmon in this creek.
While the proponent, Willie Dreiger, has proposed several mitigations, for instance, like moving the access point for drinking water up the creek, many residents say it just doesn't go far enough. The impacts to the creek will remain because, again, the effects of this placer project are just too great. Now it's over to the territorial and federal governments to assess YESUB's recommendation and issue a decision. Julian Gignac, CBC News, Whitehorse.
A new Nunavut art studio will be partnering with 2 universities to examine the loss of sea ice around Kingite. Artists with the West Baffin Cooperative will be supplying artwork to the University of Aberdeen and the University of Oregon. They'll use satellite imagery, drawing, printmaking, and sculpture to document the changes in sea ice. William Huffman is the interim general manager with the studio. He says they have a great reputation across the world, and this is another example of people asking them for a creative solution to an existing problem.
We started to look at the facilities that we've got, the concerns of our artists in terms of how they reflect the world around them, and how that would harmonize with some of the objectives of this initiative. And the idea of bringing glaciologists in the same room as, artists who make drawings and artists who print and artists who sculpt is really fascinating.
Researchers from both universities are expected to be in Kingite as early as September, when they'll work with local artists, residents, and hunters who rely on the sea ice. The study is expected to last for 5 years. When it comes to research studies, an Indigenous law expert says institutions need to do more to check people's identity for positions meant for Indigenous people. The issue came up at the Indigenous Identity Theft Summit in Winnipeg. Currently, federal research councils and other institutions rely on people to self-identify as Indigenous. But a professor of Aboriginal law at the University of Ottawa says that can open the door to legal challenges.
If you refuse to hire the person that doesn't have federally recognized status, there is a risk that that person could file a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal, for example, or file a grievance under the collective agreement. But there's also the risk, if you do hire them, that the 2 status Indians who are next in line for the job could also file a complaint saying this person is not Indigenous, this is an Indigenous designated position.
To avoid that, O'Toole says institutions should consider identification like an Indian status card that is permitted under the Human Rights Act in some circumstances. Residents of Fort Smith say part of the Fort Smith Correctional Complex may be closing down. The NWT government runs the facility and it wouldn't confirm the closure, but employees of the jail say they've received their notice. The CBC's Natalie Pressman has been looking into this and she joins me now with more. So Natalie, what do we know about this?
Well, we know that the Union of Northern Workers, which represents government workers, has been hearing from members of the Fort Smith Correctional Complex about receiving their notice. I spoke with an employee, and CBC is keeping that person confidential because they're not authorized to speak publicly, but they said that staff were pulled into a meeting last week with government officials and told that the men's unit is targeted for closure. This person says they believe this may have been in the works for a while and says that all the male inmates were actually moved to the North Slave Correctional Complex in Yellowknife last month. At the time, staff were told it was so that they could focus on training and so they could do building maintenance. But now this employee says it seems like that was in anticipation of this potential closure. The Department of Justice has confirmed that 8 inmates were moved from the Fort Smith men's unit to the Yellowknife facility on April 4th. And it's important to say that the government couldn't confirm the closure, but when I asked why they couldn't confirm it, a spokesperson said it's because the department can't comment on proposed budget items before the finance minister's budget address.
Okay, so seems like this might be a budget issue. Do we know that for sure, though?
Well, the employee that I spoke with said that they heard it had to do with budget cuts. And we know that the territory has announced it's looking to free up $150 million a year. The Department of Finance is also, really making it sound like this is going to be addressed in the budget. And that's being tabled at the legislature on Friday.
So if the closure does go through, Natalie, what impact would this have on Fort Smith?
Well, a big cut to jobs would have a big impact on Fort Smith. I spoke with Chris Westwell, who is the president of the Thabacha Chamber of Commerce. He said it would be a major blow to the town.
These kind of jobs are huge to our local economy, to our retail economy, our service economy, our housing and construction. There's a lot of trickle down that happens from every government position.
He says he's worried that as the government tries to save money, it's small communities that are going to be the ones that lose out. And that's something the union is saying too. They say that, as more services get cut outside Yellowknife, it becomes even harder to recruit and retain workers in other areas, and that just perpetuates the cycle further. So the budget address is Friday, and we'll see what happens then.
We'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. Thank you for your work, Natalie.
Thanks.
RCMP and the NWT say they've called off their search for Ralph Beaulieu. They will still continue to investigate his disappearance, though. It's been 2 weeks now since Beaulieu went missing. Family, friends, and police have been combing the woods between Betchacon and Yellowknife. Today, RCMP said they've done an exhaustive search, and they called the decision to end it difficult. Police do still want anyone with information about Beaulieu's whereabouts to contact them. In Yellowknife, emotions ran high in the courthouse today. Devin Larrabee is being sentenced for murder. He pleaded guilty last November to killing Brianna Menaco with a hatchet in front of bystanders. It's been described in court as a random killing, and his motive wasn't clear. Today, the court heard victim impact statements, and it also heard a joint submission that didn't sit well with the judge. Luke Carroll was in court. He joins me now live with more. So, Luke, what happened in court today?
Yeah, so we heard the victim impact statements. There was about a dozen filed, and these really told us about who Brianna Menaco was. Some described her as, the kindest, most loving, giving, empathetic soul. We heard it from her parents, her friends, her family, even her grandmother who's in her 80s. Her mother had to say that she had a way about her that made you feel safe. Her former teacher in Edzo talked about when she used to pick her up on her little skidoo and take her to her apartment. Many people talked about how she one day wanted to be a mother and how great a mother she would have been. But people also talked about the impact it had on them. Her father talked about it being unimaginable pain and asking, what did she do to deserve this? The Crown and defense issued a joint submission, but neither side had any clear idea as to why this really happened. It was just found to be a random act of violence, Megan.
Okay, so what was that joint submission then, Luke?
So the joint submission was life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 10 years. Both sides argued that this was a fair sentence, but the judge actually had some issues with this.
Tell me about those issues that the judge had.
Yeah, so one of them was both sides argued why this was a fair submission. The judge didn't have any sort of ruling on this, but one of the issues he had was just how late the plea was. So there were 3 trials scheduled for this matter. And Larrabee finally pled guilty to second-degree murder just before the 3rd trial was about to commence. Larrabee's defense attorney, Michael Spratt, talked about how Larrabee was acknowledging that he had acted wrong. Spratt talked about how he gave a presentation to his child's elementary school saying how it's better to acknowledge when you acted wrong beforehand than lying and being caught. But the judge said this was not what happened here. He said, quote, this was trial number 3, unquote. Spratt talked about how Larrabee is recovering from substance abuse and has admitted to his issues with substance abuse. But again, the judge took issue with this. He said he's doing heroin in the correctional center. This kind of went back and forth for a while. At one point, the judge told Spratt, Larrabee's defense attorney, to be careful as they went back and forth. And he actually called for a sudden recess. So the sentencing is going to continue tomorrow, and we're expected to hear Larrabee deliver, some comments there.
Okay, thank you so much, Luke.
Thanks, Megan.
Hi, I'm Abel. I often forget to mention that he's an amputee because Abel will try any activity he can. My arm helps me with basically everything. He doesn't see what he can't do, he sees what he can do. Yeah, this is helping. The War Amps has just given him the ability to do all the activities every kid can do. When you donate to the War Amps, you help kids like me. Thank you!
Täällä kemukset palilaw ta aulajina lepo kugyangullo amalo kokbiu yamun tinga diwaling mulu pangolo asyang miu muna toy muina daily takpa kemukset palilaw sumu tay ma buetaling ni pilariu lak sunga inuit amichwalu balong mata.
When we see Team Canada on the world stage, we're witnessing pure greatness. What we don't see is their struggle. We don't see Maggie McNeil navigating her anxiety, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander getting cut from his high school team, or Ellie Black hearing she's just too old to compete. What we don't see makes us who we are. We're all bravely facing the odds in our lives, and our bravery is our victory.
Everyone listen up.
Bursting with labor.
All these guys 21?
Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Owning an NHL team.
Penguins had us review your offer, and it looks good.
Wow. Get me on the phone with Cops Coliseum. Tell them I want to buy it.
A project to provide syphilis rapid tests in Nunavik has been given a funding boost from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. The first reported case of the sexually transmitted infection in the region was in 2016. Since then, it's spread to nearly 4% of the population. The CBC's Samuel Watt has more.
Most test samples for syphilis in Nunavik have to be sent to laboratories down south. That can mean a 2-week wait for results.
And during which they can spread infection because they haven't been treated yet.
That's Dr. Cedric Yansuni of McGill University. For the past 4 years, he's led a project to provide 3 sexual health clinics in Nunavik with syphilis rapid tests, including in Pavernatuk, where Asa Shantawarang is a sexual health nurse.
So now we could, take an action right away after the 20 minutes.
The STI can have serious consequences like irreversible brain and cardiac damage, and can even be passed on by pregnant mothers to their unborn child. While the rapid tests have helped Shantawarang start treatment for patients much sooner, he only sees those people who come forward to the clinic.
People don't really want to come to get the checkup for STD screening and whatnot. It's something that we need to do regularly.
Dr. Yansuni agrees the biggest challenge is meeting people where they are, which he hopes to do with the $249,000 funding boost.
We want to take the tests outside of the health clinics and bring them to non-traditional testing sites, like places of work, maybe the hockey arena.
But his first goal is to introduce rapid tests to all 14 Nunavik communities over the coming year. Samuel Watt, CBC News, Iqaluit.
The airport terminal in Arviat is once again open to the public after being shut down by a fuel spill earlier this month. The building's fuel system developed a leak, and thousands of liters of heating fuel seeped into a berm and mixed with water. Around 55 barrels of that mixture had to be pumped out, but now the terminal can resume its normal operations.
It's opening up again. The air was tested. It passed.
so it meets standards. So everyone is allowed back in the building because of those test results.
While the terminal was closed, passengers were using a Calm Air cargo warehouse to wait for their flights and check their baggage. People in the Beaufort Delta and beyond are mourning the loss of Robert Guptana, a longtime leader in the region. He was one of the signatories of the Inuvialuit Final Agreement. He also served as chair of the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation from 1994 to 1995. The CBC's Des Loreen has more on his legacy.
I'll always remember Robert as a happy man, as a really hard-working man, that Robert, and a very proud Inuvialuit.
Robert Guptana, a proud, hard-working man dedicated to the people of the Beaufort Delta. He spent many years negotiating the Inuvialuit land claim and the Nunavut Agreement.
You know, Robert's done a lot for the Inuvialuit in his community and the Inuvialuit of the Western Arctic, and I think he's really going to be missed for all the knowledge that he had with him.
Guptana passed away on Friday. He was 81 years old. His closest friends say they'll remember him for his passion for Inuvialuit culture.
And he always enjoyed sharing his stories with each and every one.
We had no binoculars or any kind of a scope, but I see something moving.
CBC listeners would recognize Guptana's voice. He was a regular telling old-time stories on Northwind. He also told tales for the Inuvialuit Communication Society. No funeral services have been announced yet. Des Loreen, CBC News, Inuvik.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
You don't scare me.
Look out! Ain't nobody gonna stop me.
We have a new world record.
Oh my God.
We're a team. We fight the best we can.
Okay, ladies, what do you guys want to watch? All these guys 21?
Woo! Let's go!
Tide's in! Time's up!
Bursting with flavor.
Everyone listen up.
Wow.
Nailed it.
Thank you for choosing Plan B.
Tell me what I need to do to save my family!
Please enter your date of travel.
I can't do this anymore.
If you could go back,
change things, would you do it?
So, you want to watch CBC News Explore, a new kind of news channel. Well, here's one way to find us. We're on CBC Gem. Stream anytime for free. CBC News Explore.